Hi everyone, I'm Anna. I recently started doing some upcycling of thrifted clothing, taking graphic t-shirts and bits that I find at thrift shops and that, and turning them into these really cool hippie style ponchos. And today I'm going to show you how I do it. There's a lot of ways out there. You might have your method. This is how I do it. I do remember when I first started sewing not that long ago, I was all new to this and I was always afraid to make that first cut in something thinking I'd ruin it. But really, if you're using thrifted things or things in your closet that you don't want and don't wear, what's the harm? You're only out a few bucks, if anything. And at the very least, you might have fun and end up with something that you really love and that's fun to wear. So let's go. Okay, you're going to need a t-shirt, then a scarf, or an existing poncho. You'll need some fabric scissors and pins, and a tape measure or ruler will be really handy too. I'll be using a scarf today. I find lots of these in thrift stores for just a few dollars, so it's a great choice. Just make sure it's not too narrow. But you could also use an existing poncho. The benefit of that is the side stitching that creates the armholes is likely already done for you. You can even use any other fabric you've got on hand as long as it's large enough to form the sides of the poncho. So first lay your t-shirt out flat and just smooth it out as much as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just kind of get most of the wrinkles out. And the next part, you can eyeball it if you like, or you can measure it. It really doesn't matter. I tend to go about an inch inside of the shoulder seam. So I'm just going to put a little pin there just to give myself something to guide me as I make my cut. And then I like to just lay a longer ruler if you've got one, because you just want to go pretty much straight down. So just to give me an idea. And you can put another couple pins if it's helpful, or not. You can just really just eyeball it is fine too. So then I'm just going to start at the bottom and use those pins as a guide to cut straight up. Okay, you could just flip this piece that you cut over, lay it on top if you line it up pretty well, and use that as a guide to cut again. But just because my edges are curling in a bit, I'm going to do the pin method again. So again, I'm going to come in about 1 inch from my shoulder seam. So you should now have a t-shirt that looks something like this, and it separates completely into the two halves, front and back. Put that aside. So if you're using an existing poncho, lay it flat and smooth it out as best you can, and then lay your cut t-shirt on top, just to give you an idea of where you're going to cut the poncho. Then you can just use that as a guide and cut straight down both sides, so you'll have your two sides to use for the new poncho. Then you would just remove the middle and save that for another project. So if you're using a scarf like me, you'll want to start with it being folded in half through the middle. This is the bottom edge where all the fringe is. You'll want that down to the bottom if you have fringe on yours like mine. And now we're just going to cut this in half this way to get our two sides. There's a couple of ways you could do that. You could go through and measure it and pin and try to find the exact center, depending on what your scarf looks like. Or you could take and fold this side over and then just cut down the folded edge this way. Mine, because as you can see, it's a bit misshapen, it's really old, it's worn a bit. I'm gonna go more with the visual. Because of this design, I prefer to go more with the visual center where it sort of looks best. So I've just sort of found my center point on this end, as well as the center of the design on that end. And I'm just gonna cut right through that middle. It won't matter if the sides are exactly perfect measurement-wise. I think the design being visually centered will be better.
So here I'm just putting some pins in to act as a guideline when I'm making the cut. And then just cut straight down that line.
You should now have two pieces of scarf to form the left and right edges of your new poncho. just make sure you've got the cut edges of the scarf facing the cut edge of the t-shirt, because those are the two we're going to pin and sew together. So I'm just going to fold that out of the way for a sec, and while we've got these laying flat, I'm just going to put a little pin right in there to mark the center of the scarf. That'll make it easier when we start pinning it together. Now I'm going to open it up so it's inside out. Now we'll do the same thing with your t-shirt. Open that up. You're going to want to find the shoulder seam and line it up with that pin. And we want to pin them right sides together. So this is inside out, this is inside out. We're going to pull the middle of that together. Line it up and pin the two together. Now you know that that's in the center. Now we're just going to continue down one side. Now you're just going to return to that center seam and work your way down the other side, doing the exact same thing. So before you start, make sure you've got plenty of thread on your bobbin. You really don't want that to run out halfway through a seam. And then I also like to mark the seam allowance on mine. It just makes it easier to follow along and make sure you get a roughly straight stitch. Doesn't have to be perfect, but what I like to do, on the far right side of your throat plate, you've probably got markings for say 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch or whatever you like to use. I like to put a piece of masking tape down, and then I just carry that mark forward, as you can see here, because it can be hard to see the lines way up here as you're sewing. So I just try to keep, as I guide my material through, just sort of try to follow that little blue line there. But another thing you can do that can make it easier is if you got something like this on hand, this weather strip. It's just a sort of piece of foam with some adhesive on the back. Cut a piece of that off a few inches long, and you can adhere that there as well. So it's the same as the masking tape, but it actually gives you sort of a raised edge to follow as you go in, and that can help too. So we're going to start with a straight stitch. On my machine, I set the stitch length using this dial here. I tend to use number 9 on my machine, which is 3 millimeters or a 1/8 inch stitch length. So now I'm going to put the fabric underneath the presser foot, and I'm just going to start about where the edge of the two pieces meet. So I don't have to start all the way down here on the edge of the t-shirt. I'm going to start wherever those two fabrics meet. So that's the part I'm going to start on, and I'm just going to line that up underneath the presser foot and bring it forward to that mark that you've made wherever your seam allowance is going to start. Pull out that first pin. So smooth it out flat, and also check underneath. Make sure you don't have anything bunched up. You don't want this part of your scarf to get accidentally sewn into it. So just make sure you've got that out of the way and everything's relatively flat. Put your presser foot down, and we're going to sew forward 2 or 3 stitches, then press the back stitch button to go backwards 2 or 3 stitches to lock the stitches. Backwards. Now you're just going to continue sewing forward, keeping your fabric smooth and everything out of the way as you go, following that line as best you can, and pull your pins out before you get to them. You don't want to sew over those. I'm almost to the shoulder seam. When I get there, I'm just going to make sure it lays down nice and flat, but I'm also going to back stitch a couple times just to reinforce that. And now we'll just continue down the other side of the shirt. So I've just come to almost the edge where the scarf starts on the other side. So I'm just going to sew that far and then do back stitch again. And gently pull it out. You want to clip your threads now and go over to the other side where you started and do the same. So now I'm just going to check the edges before I finish the seams. If you've got an overlocker or a serger, by all means feel free to use that. I don't, so I'm going to use a zigzag stitch to finish. But I like to first come through. If there's an excess of threads, that's not really too bad, but you can cut those off. Or if you come to places where the material didn't stay, like here, like see where there's a bit longer sticking out one side than the other, not a problem. You can just trim that off. You just want to kind of even them up as much as you can so that the edges are pretty close together when we do the finishing step. So just go down and trim it first. So now to finish the edge, I'm going to use a zigzag stitch. And I'm using the widest one that I have. On my machine that's number 4, but yours may be different. So because my t-shirt is actually longer than the scarf, I'm just going to start where the two meet and start finishing the edges that way. If your scarf sticks out a lot longer than your shirt and you're going to keep that on there, I would fold the edge of your scarf over a little bit as we start this, and then just do your finishing stitch until you get up to where the t-shirt joins it again, and then you don't have to do any folding. You'll just go along the edge like we're going to do now. But again, mine, I'm just going to start right on the edge there. So we'll put them back under. And this time we're not going to use your seam guide. You want to start so that you can just sort of see the edge of this fabric through the right side of the hole in the needle plate, or in the presser foot there. Because that's where this zigzag stitch is going to go back and forth, and on the far right side it should catch right on the edge or just over the edge. So I'm going to set it down right there. And again, I'm going to stitch a couple of times and then back stitch, and then we'll go forward. And you should actually be able to see just a tiny bit past the edge of the material. You want to really see the needle going just over that edge every time. I'm going to keep the needle. If you need to readjust your fabric, make sure the needle's down. And we'll keep going. Again, if your scarf sticks out further, when you get to the end of the t-shirt, fold the edge of the scarf over just that little bit and keep going till you get to the end. So I'm just checking the other side here just to make sure that I've caught it and most of it's gone around the edge. And any spots where I didn't quite catch the scarf, I'm just going to go over those again. So there's the first side sewn on. Now we just need to repeat the process for the other side. So we'll go back and pin it on, same as we did before. Straight stitch, and then do the zigzag on the edge. Right, so now I've got both sides attached to the t-shirt. So the next step is just to put in the stitches for the armhole. As I've said, if you've got a pre-made poncho that you're using, it likely already has these in, and then you'd be done. In my case, what I did is I tried it on, because every scarf is a different shape and size. Sometimes I come down from the top about 8 inches, and then stitch for about another 12 inches. And usually in from the side, I go about 5.5. Since I've got a nice pattern on here that follows that, pretty much I can just sort of use this as my guideline as I'm coming down, even though it's not a straight line. But in this one, when I tried it on, I decided to come down about 9 inches. And so I've just put a little white mark there. And then I'm going to bring that down. I don't want to go all the way to the bottom, so normally I'd go about 12. This one with the pattern, I might just decide to go to 11. So I might just go to this mark here. So what I'm going to do I'm just going to put a pin in. And you want to get your edges lined up as well as you can, just so they're kind of in the same spot. And I'm just going to put a pin in right here. And then again, where I want to come down here. Now, you could, depending on the color of your scarf, you could put a little white chalk line down to make it easy to follow. You could put a couple of pins in between on the line that you want to sew on. Again, I'm just going to try to come down this line here. Okay, so that we're back at the machine, I'm going with a straight stitch again, same one I used in the beginning to do the seams. And I added a couple of extra pins in here just to make sure, because I had the edges of the scarf lined up nicely. I don't want them to slide away from one another. So I've just added a couple pins in there. We're going to pull that now in. And we're not going to use our normal seam guide because we're coming much further in for this. I'm just going to pull that in to line up pretty much with that first pin. And again, sort of in the area where I said I was going to make my stitches. So for me, that's right about here. Make sure my threads are back. Now, if your scarf doesn't have a nice line or pattern you can follow like this, remember you can just put pins along where you want to sew and pull them out as you go. So I'm lined up at the start. I'm going to sew just a couple stitches and then back stitch, and then we'll just go on down till I hit the bottom pin. And then we'll just back stitch a couple times again. And that's it. That's this side. Carefully pull that out. If it doesn't want to give, just turn your crank wheel a little bit to loosen that up. And it should pull out. So now I'm just going to cut those threads while I'm here, and then we'll go back and repeat the same process on the other side. Okay, my sides are done. It's wearable right now. You just have to make up your mind based on the materials that you're using. Most often what happens is my scarf ends up longer than my t-shirt, in which case I don't worry about it. I'm fine with that. It looks really good that way. Sometimes it's quite a bit longer, sometimes it's just a little longer. In this case, my t-shirt is just a little bit longer than my scarf. So it's up to you. You can leave it if you like it that way. You can just cut straight across here so that it's even with the end of your scarf and leave it, because t-shirts don't ravel. It might roll a little bit or curl up a little bit. That's okay. Or you can hem it. So, and again, it's not going to have to be perfect because the scarf wasn't perfect. It was old and it was sort of misshapen. So I'm just going to kind of go fold this up once to the bottom stitch line where I attached it to the scarf, and then fold it up once more, and I'll pin it there. And I'm just going to run a straight stitch along that hem. Got both sides, and then I'll just tie that up in the middle and pin those down as well. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so I've just got it lined up close to the edge there, and I'm just going to do a straight stitch relatively close to the fold here. Do a back stitch a couple times at the beginning as well. At the end as well. Cut your threads on both sides and then repeat that on the other side. So here's the finished product. Now I've got a stylish new poncho that I'm gonna wear. I love graphic t-shirts, I've got heaps of them, but they're not usually particularly flattering on me, sometimes because they're really big and boxy, sometimes maybe they're just too small for me now and I wanna cut it and make it into something I can wear, and that's what this does, and it's a really easy project. You can see here's one I made using a poncho, so this was already a poncho, I just cut the center out like I said earlier and put my t-shirt in. This one was another scarf that I did. And in this one, the scarf was longer than the shirt and I didn't have to do any adjusting on. The only other thing you might think about is the neckline. Now I'm quite happy with this. It's comfortable, it's right where I want it. But if you started maybe with a men's shirt or something that's got a thick collar on it or it's too tight for you or anything, you can just cut that off. I usually just cut right inside the edge of the collar all the way around and you end up with a slight boat neck and it's much more flattering and comfortable. You could cut a V-neck into it. I don't want to cut into my graphics, so I'm not going to do that, and I'm happy with it how it is. But there's a lot of options. Do whatever makes sense to you. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this and found it useful. And if you did, please give it a thumbs up and I hope you subscribe.